Hello there, welcome to Moray's Muse, a non-AI generated history channel. We're trying to cut through the AI slop. My name is Moray. We talk about history on this channel a lot. Actually, mostly the Roman Empire. Go Rome or go home, as I like to say. Today we're talking about Hortensia. Hortensia, in some ways, is seen as the closest to the first female lawyer. And you're probably thinking, well, women were not allowed to speak in Rome. That's correct. However, during wartime, women had a lot more roles in society. Now, Hortensia, who had quite a famous father, was around 43 BCE. And she's famous for making quite an incredible speech in the Roman Forum at the time of the Second Triumvirate, something I'm really fond of. And whilst she was legally excluded from the political system, as were all women, Trump wants to do that today, she delivered a remarkable speech and she was an incredible advocate. Now, Hortensia did come from a very good family. Her father, Quintus Hortensius Hortalus, was very prominent. So let's talk about the time that Hortensia lived in. So we all know about the Second Triumvirate. We know about Octavian, later known as Augustus, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, and they wanted to reconstitute the Republic. But due to the Lex Titia, they had the legal framework to change Rome forever, and the triumvirs were way above the legal frameworks of that time. They gave themselves power. The primary objective of the Second Triumvirate was to wage wars against the liberators, so Brutus, Cassius, the assassins of Julius Caesar, and they needed to fund a formidable army. Now, the triumvirs obviously proscripted, so if you don't know anything about proscription, you should watch my Catalan video. But they seized and sold the property of those they targeted, but it wasn't enough money for an army. So they needed to tax wealthy Roman women. That was plan B. For them, it was a very financially motivated thing. Obviously, the proscriptions had already deprived Roman women of their husbands, fathers, their sons, their brothers. And these women who they wanted to tax were very impacted by the proscriptions already. We talk about Octavian, now known as Augustus, as being this great man who was very noble because actually of Livia Drusilla, his wife's PR work. But actually he was a bastard. Not literally a bastard, but he was a bastard. And the Second Triumvirate was cruel. We talk about the cruelness of Julius Caesar, but my God, there is a reason that Cicero had a problem with Mark Antony. And this is where we have Hortensia's speech. The Second Triumvirate was a tyranny. Now we talk about Hortensia's father. Her daddy was a lawyer. He was a legal advocate and consul, and he lived from 114 BC to 54 BC. And he was one of Rome's finest orators. We know Cicero was being like the best orator, one of the most famous, now known as solicitors in history, but Hortalus was great. And Hortensia grew up in the legal system before it was the legal system that we know. We have Empress Theodora to thank for that. And historians like Appian and Valerius Maximus praised Hortensia because she brought back her father's legacy. Yes, Hortensia had resources and her education was invaluable compared to her peers. She was trained in Greek and Roman history, philosophy, and rhetoric, exclusively reserved for male citizens of public life. Hortensia and her father, Quintus, were known for being associated with the Lex Hortensia, a pivotal law in Roman history. There was also a plebeian dictator called Quintus Hortensius. So the Second Triumvirate need money and shit out of luck. So they decide to tax 1,400 wealthy Roman women. And they did this because women in Rome had no power. So it was very easy to target what they saw as vulnerable minority. I mean, there were way more vulnerable women, imagine non-rich women, but you know what I mean. Outraged by this, a group of the women protested. The first port of action was to pit the female members of the triumvirates. If you know anything about Fulvia, who was Mark Antony's wife, didn't go down well. Fulvia wasn't too happy about that. So instead they went to the Roman Forum and Hortensia was their spokeswoman. 42 BCE. These women gathered at the Roman Forum. Octavian, Mark Antony and Lepidus were seated and Hortensia and the other women approached them. And the triumvirs were quite unhappy that a group of women tried to approach them. How dare they? But the crowd of onlookers did protest and the triumvirs had to relent. And Hortensia delivered her famous speech. Hortensia starts with how the triumvirs have brought so much suffering to the men of Rome, and in a very feminist way. She says if they tax them, then they're done for, because they have no power as women. This emotional foundation gave her the subsequent logical and legal arguments. Her sentiment was no taxation without representation. She directly asked the question to the triumvirs, why should we pay taxes when we have no rights? No honors. This was a very sophisticated legal appeal back in the day. Roman women were excluded from Roman custom and they were excluded from public office and military command. This exclusion, because they were excluded, meant that they shouldn't be taxed. She turned a weakness into a plus and she demonstrated jurisprudence. She stated, Hortensia spoke about how women helped Roman society and made references to the Punic wars. And they done so voluntarily, but instead of making the reference to fields or houses or dowries, she made the reference to something every woman likes, their own jewelry. And making that comparison, using her femininity, gained the triumvirs' respect. She skillfully employed the three classical modes of persuasion, ethos, pathos, and logos. Her credibility ethos, the term that we know today, was established because she was the woman of a very powerful and persuasive man, and this is why the group of women made her spokeswoman. She had emotional appeal, pathos, but most importantly she had logos, logical arguments, and these three elements made her argument to the crowd very succinct. The triumvirs were quite staggered by the public challenge Hortensia had brought to them, and thanks to the crowd they had to concede. Now it wasn't a complete victory, like these things never were. The tax was reduced to 400 women rather than the 1,400. So it was, yeah. And then they taxed the freedmen with property holdings. And it was a huge sign in Rome that despite Hortensia coming from a marginalized group, she did very, very well. However, the men were threatened. You would think Hortensia's speech would open the then legal world. Well, it wasn't a legal world then, but you would think Hortensia's speech would create opportunities for women, right? Well, she was so successful that a new edict was passed that prohibited women from representing others in court, and they felt threatened by her. Trust me, I'm going through it right now. When somebody feels threatened by your arguments, they try and shut it down. So yes, her victory was amazing, but it came with an institutionalized setback. And Hortensia's narration makes a landmark event in ancient Rome. But it is a lesson for all of us. Sometimes you're just too powerful and you don't know it, and the bullies need to shut you down. Out of the Second Triumvirate, Lepidus didn't do well, and Mark Antony, we know what happened to Mark Antony, the man whore. And Octavian, also known as Augustus, he probably had the best life. But Hortensia will live in memory for a very long time because she proved how powerful women could be, and the fact that edict was passed that women could not represent others after she made her fantastic speech is testament to that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.